The second offering of 2002 sees Shoji Yonemura once again returning to write, with Minoru Ohara coming on as director. We also see the return of the leading lady, at least in some capacity, with Alina, voiced by Romy Park. The ending this time is a new remix of the theme of Lupin III. In a quiet New York bar, the reporter Alina meets with Jigen, interested to learn how he came to know Lupin. Jigen stays tight-lipped and wanders into an alley with her following. He finally breaks his silence, thinking back to when he was a bodyguard for the Mafia boss Galvez. Galvez has met a woman at a party he's hosting, only for her to spray him with knockout gas. Investigating the safe for a certain item, she's interrupted by Jigen. He opens fire as the woman's revealed to be a disguised Lupin. Lupin and Jigen engage in a brief gunfight, alerting the rest of Galvez's henchmen. Lupin dives through a window, avoiding Jigen's gunfire as he goes. Outrunning any pursuers, he soon meets up with an old rival, Brad, learning about Jigen's reputation. The treasure that Galvez was holding is known as the Clam of Hermes, a tube that's nigh unbreakable, said to contain a scroll that can recreate the material it's made from. Brad declares he'll get the clam first, leaving with his girlfriend as Lupin ponders the situation. Another of Galvez's henchmen, Shade, isn't happy that Jigen failed to take down Lupin. Galvez tries to keep the peace, as the clam is still safe for now. Jigen's not interested and heads out, fighting off a few back alley muggers on the way. Shade, meanwhile, tracks down Lupin to his hideout. They shoot up what turns out to be a decoy. Turns out the clam's already been stolen in the interim, though Lupin knows nothing of it. Lupin dumps them outside, but Shade leaves a grenade behind for him, not that it does much. Figuring Brad to be the one behind the clam's robbery, Lupin heads to his hideout. The place has already been ransacked and Brad himself has been shot. He doesn't last long either. Rather familiar death too, poetic sounding line in the New York sunset. Only difference is there's no clue to the treasure in his dying breath. Lupin tracks down Brad's girlfriend, who's a certain underground mover by the name of Fujiko Mine. She denies even knowing Brad, but changes her tune when Lupin shows her the Clam of Hermes. The two drive out and Lupin shows Fujiko Brad's lucky pendant, something that once saved him from a gunshot but now damaged by an armour-piercing bullet. Fujiko still denies shooting Brad, as in her words she'd already have run off with any treasure by now. Lupin leaves the clam with Fujiko, having learned there's some kind of key needed to open it, and warns her to avoid the Mafia for now. Zenigata lands in New York, currently on the search for Fujiko. He's given a hero's welcome by Director Crawford, and allowed access to whatever he needs. Then he wakes up to discover he's stuck with an uncooperative taxi and not much else. While caught at a traffic light, he spots some drug dealers. They gang up, but prove no match for Zenigata. Too bad for him, they were undercover cops. Crawford leads him to the archives to read up on Fujiko, assigning him an assistant by the name of George McFly. Not that one. Goemon's in training when someone informs him of something that catches his attention. Meanwhile, Galvez's men catch up to Fujiko. They take the Clam of Hermes from her, but it turns out to be a fake. Despite this, they come to an agreement to track down Lupin and the real Clam. Lupin finds her while driving, not in the best state. He helps clean her up and learns about Galvez's plans. She then turns on the charm and plants a bug on him when she gets close enough. Zenigata decides to try out some all-American cuisine. George raises an eyebrow at his appetite while they read up on Fujiko. Lupin and Fujiko head out to the tower of a tycoon and smuggler known as Hans Dollarhide, having learned the key is possibly in his possession. Before making a move, he decides to make some attempts to open the clam without the key, which goes about as you'd expect. He then hacks the tower's systems to give them a calling card. Zenigata receives word of Lupin's message, demanding information on him. Galvez also gets wind of it, planning to make a move once Lupin steals the key. Jigen wanders off and encounters Lupin as he goes for a drive. Despite their guns being readied at each other, Lupin tells him he's wasting his potential working for Galvez. Jigen's only interest is killing Lupin, diving out of the car. Of course, Lupin's already gone by the time he's steadied himself to attack. Later, Jigen and Fujiko meet and discuss their plans. She suggests teaming up, but even back then he didn't really like her. Zenigata tries to tag along on Lupin's case as he suspects it'll lead him to Fujiko, but he gets refused. He tags along anyway, partly thanks to Dolarhyde making a media circus out of the calling card distracting Crawford. Disguised as a reporter, Lupin leads Crawford to a news van. A few seconds later, he emerges in a Crawford costume. Zenigata, meanwhile, decides to take an underground route to Dolarhyde. Lupin goes over the security details with Dolarhyde. Neither of them expect Zenigata coming through the vents, however. Despite his concern that there aren't any guards on sewer entrances, as he's confirmed firsthand, Dolarhyde is confident Lupin won't get into his safe. The calling card's allotted time arrives and the power is cut. While it returns soon enough, Lupin's voice declares he's stolen the key, only for Zenigata to discover a tape player. They decide to check the safe anyway to be sure. Lupin takes the key, supposedly for analysis, but Zenigata's suspicious. Lupin turns it back around by pointing out that Zenigata's the suspicious one given he came in through the vents. Arriving at the roof, Lupin sends the police after a decoy balloon. George has found the real Crawford in the meantime, so Lupin tries to escape among the police force. Too bad for him, Zenigata wants him as a chauffeur. Lupin tries to bluff that he's supposed to help with the barricades, but Zenigata sees through him as they're already set up. Lupin kicks Zenigata out, but gets surrounded by Galvez's men soon after. Having discovered the bug, Lupin smiles as a bomb goes off, allowing him to escape in the confusion. Travelling along the river, Lupin encounters Jigen again. He forces Lupin back ashore and they engage in a standoff. Fujiko then flies in and swipes the key for herself. Galvez's men then catch up, outnumbering the pair pretty badly. Shade also takes Fujiko captive, having never really trusted her. Lupin and Jigen are locked up and begin arguing. Jigen's also fully aware that something like this won't hold Lupin, to which Lupin admires his perceptiveness. Lupin offers to free Jigen, but he's not about to turn on Galvez just yet. Galvez walks in, demanding the clam of Hermes for Fujiko's life. Lupin's got no ties to her at this point, but relents nonetheless. Galvez changes tactics, saying Lupin can walk free on condition if he kills Jigen, tossing him his Walther armed with a single bullet. Lupin takes the shot, freeing Jigen. He then tosses the gun back to Galvez, telling him Fujiko knows where the clam's located. Galvez decides to shoot them both, but the gun goes off in his face. The lights then go out and Goemon makes his presence known. He claims the key for himself, revealing it to be a sword known as Zantetsuken. He slices his way through Galvez's men and cuts Lupin and Jigen's cage. A big flashy fight ensues. Goemon leads some of the gunfire at a stack of explosives. He then cuts a hole in the ceiling as the place explodes, allowing Lupin and the others an easy exit. Fujiko goes off on her own, but Jigen gets surrounded again. Lupin comes to the rescue in his ever-famous and ever-destroyed SSK. As they drive, Lupin indicates the Federal Reserve Bank to Jigen, saying he wants to rob it one day if Jigen ever wants to join him. Zenigata and George are in a rough part of the city on the search for Lupin. The former's attitude only serves to antagonise the locals. Of course, being as they're not Lupin, they go down before he does, and on top of that he gets the info he wanted as a bonus. Lupin and Jigen receive a letter from Goemon, challenging them for ownership of the clam of Hermes. Zenigata's found Lupin's hideout by this point, spotting Jigen leaving. He makes a move on Lupin, who barely even acknowledges him. He then gets dumped outside when he trips and pulls a rope by accident, but the letter falls with him. Despite this, Crawford's growing increasingly sick of Zenigata's antics and plans to ship him back to Japan. Jigen approaches Goemon, challenging him as he wants to be the one to kill Lupin. They match each other in combat as Lupin watches and applauds. He then steals Zantetsuken with a magnet. Goemon grabs for it, but the magnet opens to reveal a bunch of replicas. He soon finds the real one and fights Lupin throughout the city. Meanwhile, George breaks Zenigata out, having grown impressed by his work ethic. Goemon and Lupin's battle takes them through the subway system. They then head out to a highway and continue their fight on top of the travelling vehicles, Goemon explaining that he doesn't want Zantetsuken's formula being replicated. Lupin uses an old familiar liquid on Goemon that ignites when exposed to air. Goemon turns the flames back at Lupin, and they fall into the river below thanks to the truck they're on also getting caught in the fire. Lupin quickly gets back ashore and offers Goemon some help. Goemon slashes at him, inadvertently hitting the clam. Jigen rejoins the pair as Galvez and his men track them down. Fujiko takes the scroll for herself as everyone fights it out. Zenigata and George spot her as she escapes and move in on her. Jigen and Goemon handle Galvez, while Lupin chases Fujiko after knocking out Zenigata. He also learns Fujiko's in league with Shade. Lupin notes it's rather bold of Fujiko to team up with the man who killed her boyfriend, having recognised his gun calibre. Shade takes aim at Lupin, only for Fujiko to shoot the former in revenge. With the last of his strength, Shade pulls a grenade. Lupin and Fujiko flee, but the scroll's caught in the blast. With the scroll gone, Goemon takes his leave, saying they'll meet again if fate decrees. As George calls in the cavalry, Fujiko also takes her leave, not wanting to associate with a womanizer like Lupin, even with Lupin saying she'll be the only woman he pursues from this point on. Zenigata survived the blast and cuffs Lupin. A lot. Lupin still escapes, swapping himself out for Galvez. Crawford congratulates Zenigata for his efforts, but he's thrown in with Galvez's men as Zenigata believes him to be Lupin in disguise. That or he just wants revenge for everything Crawford put him through. George suggests Zenigata sign up for the ICPO if he wants to continue the Lupin pursuit. Jigen picks up Lupin as he runs from the scene, insisting this is the end of the road for them, but he's clearly come around to the idea of teaming up. Back in the present, Alina's wowed by the story. The rest of the gang then show up, which includes Jigen as Alina was talking to a disguised Lupin, revealing it was all a ruse to seduce her. The gang then pulls a disappearing act as Alina spots the Federal Reserve in the distance. The gang soon emerge, having stolen the gold there, Lupin showing the broken clam of Hermes to indicate that maybe the story he told was real in at least some capacity. I think when it comes to how the gang met, the idea of multiple choice pass tends to come into play. They could have met as adults on this heist, they could have come together because of Fujiko's involvement, or Lupin and Jigen knew each other in school. Not about consistency, but what has the making of an entertaining story. Darker in nature as it may be, I prefer a woman called Fujiko Mine's take on things for the most part as a how the gang met story. Still, Lupin Zero throwing a bit of a wrench in aside, there's at least something of a through line of the gang meeting one by one. Even with the idea of multiple choice, I've always taken every story to have happened in some capacity personally, and the final shot of the gang with the clam seems to support that. As a story, it's an enjoyable watch. A bit too clean cut for the gang's origins if I'm honest, but a fun ride. On the note of clean cuts, Goemon comes off as a bit overpowered here. He's certainly always been the most skilled swordsman, but he struggled with some early fights, and even the earlier TV movies showed he was still trying to challenge his cutting ability. Granted, I suppose any inconsistencies can all be chalked down to Lupin embellishing some aspects. The fight between Lupin and Goemon was a nice touch at least, utilising the fight on the highway and the flammable liquid in their actual fights, back when they were enemies in early Series 1. Certainly a riddle for the ages as to why Zenigata was after Fujiko initially. Well, besides the obvious she's a criminal, I suppose. Not really something I'm a fan of, if I'm completely honest, especially as he shifts focus to Lupin pretty quickly either way. Still, he's on point character-wise, managing to hold his own pretty well even if his targets end up being wrong in more ways than one. Lupin and Jigen's initial animosity turned friendship wasn't too bad here. It seems to be a consistent thing that they start off antagonistic, but Lupin sees something in Jigen that leads to a team-up, while Jigen's reserved but generally comes around to it. Funny seeing Lupin be distrusting and almost antagonistic towards Fujiko too. She's still able to charm him, of course, but I like the angle that he's not entirely enamoured by her in the early stages. That said, Brad could probably have done with a bit more screen time. The idea was there, but they could have had him do more before being inevitably killed off. Antagonists are a bit one note, but they do have their quirks that help them stand out. For example, Galvez being quick to diffuse any tension between Jigen and Shade was a nice angle to show he's not just ready to kill anyone who proves a burden, even with Shade building up to eventually planning to betray him. Art and animation are generally fine here. Still got that early digital blue filtering, but they mask it a bit with sunsets and some vivid colouring in some set pieces. Blonde Fujiko from the end looked pretty awful though. Should have just stuck with her brown hair even if it was meant to show a passage of time. Still, beyond that, good action, and while I'm more a fan of the other origin stories, this is still a recommended watch. Next time, an old friend's funeral leads to Lupin making an effort to returning some old treasures. Until then.